Hey everyone, Box Gods here, and welcome to our Monsoon Modular Reservoir Systems how-to video series. This is video number 3 in that series, and today we're going to be covering a more advanced topic, how to use multiple tube segments or the coupler. For this example, we're going to be using two 100mm tube segments in our warp core pattern. This is a frosted warp core sort of look. We're going to be using 100mm tension rods for each section of tube, we're going to be using the coupler, which we mentioned, and I think we're just going to use a basic end cap with one end facing port on this end and no end facing ports on that end. I could, if I wanted to, use side-facing ports, but for this example we'll stick with these parts today. If you haven't watched our overview video, which is the first video in this series, which covers all the different end caps and pumps and mounts and tubes and all those types of things, I suggest you do, as it will give you a better idea of what's available to you. Mounts. I'm using basic matte black 25mm mounts. These also come in a 50mm and a 12mm low profile version, but this is what we'll be using for today. When you order the coupler, it comes with 6 of these. They're set screws basically. If you're from the South or Southern United States, they sometimes refer to those as grub screws. In Boston and that area of the country, they sometimes call them sinkers or sinkas. Your coupler comes with hex wrenches and a box wrench. For the purpose of the video today, just to speed things up, I'm going to be using a universal ball driver. Alright, the very first step to do, I've done it on the first 4, but if you look at the set screw, one end has an opening for a wrench, like so. You want to go ahead and insert those into one end of the tension rods. Take your box wrench, which is stuck to my table here, and basically snug those down pretty good. Don't go crazy, you don't want to blow out the threads. Just make sure you put in the correct end. You don't want to put the end that doesn't have the opening for the wrench. I think we'll eventually switch to set screws that have a wrench socket on both sides, but just in case, make sure you're careful. Again, just snug those down, don't go crazy. Alright, we're going to take those that we just did. I've got my O-rings in place in here, and I've made sure that they're clean. There are no cat hairs, eyelashes, Cheetos. Take your other tension rod. Basically, just going to put those down so they're snug. I'm not going crazy to tighten them right now. One thing I want to cover here real quick, if you notice on the end of the tension rods there is a wrench flat. When you insert that into the socket that the tension rod fits into, I don't know if it'll show, but once the tension rod bottoms out in that hole, the wrench flat doesn't show. So if you keep tightening after that point, you're basically wasting your time, because once the tension rod has hit the bottom of that hole, tightening is just going to risk blowing out the screws. It doesn't do any good to just keep tightening and tightening and tightening. So there's really no need to get carried away with the tightening. Alright, I've gone ahead and made sure that all these are just good and hand tight. Haven't gone crazy with them. Again, we only really, our water cooling loops in our PCs generally work at less than 5 psi, which in the grand scheme of pressure, I mean, your household water supply usually is 60 psi, so it's just, there's just no need to go crazy with all the tightening. Got both my O-rings in. Gonna set my tube in place. Pop it down. Got my black screws. These come with the tension rod portion of the program. I'll take my first cap, make sure my O-ring is clean, make sure the channel is clean. I'm going to tap that into place gently. One thing you want to be careful of is on the back, there are 3 mounting positions: perpendicular, 60 degrees left, and 60 degrees right. If you want to have everything mount face at the same direction, make sure you line those holes up. How I do that is I just pick one hole, make sure they're sort of in the same channel of tension rods. If you forget, you'll end up having to take it apart and you'll gripe and complain. So just pay attention to what you're doing. As you put these in, you just push the rods until they're out of the way. Drop your screws in. I'm just going to slightly tighten these so that they don't fall out while we're maneuvering around. You're going to feel the rods moving. Don't worry about it. We're going to use the wrench on the other end to take care of that. I'm basically just tightening until I feel the cap start to press against my finger and feel the rods turn. You want to tighten these. Right now we're not tightening, but when you get to the portion where you're tightening, you don't want to tighten this one all the way down and then tighten this one and work around like that, because you'll load the cap unevenly. Just like putting the wheels on a car, you want to tighten this one and then that just a little bit, tighten this one a little bit, and go to that one, tighten it a little bit, and then this one. You kind of want to go opposite ends in a star pattern to make sure you're drawing the end cap down with an even pressure map onto the O-rings. Again, I've just barely started these so that the cap doesn't fall off while I'm maneuvering the other end. Speaking of, I'm going to install, make sure I got my O-ring in there. Do not forget this O-ring, because when you go and put the tubes together and tighten everything down and put it in your case and then fill it with water and water's pouring out because you forgot that O-ring, you will be very mad. Also, I forgot to mention that since I'm doing the work core tube here, I want to make sure I line those up so that they're, if that's the way you want it, how they're lined up correctly. Again, if you have to loosen it up to move that, you'll be irritated, so pay attention to what you're doing. Push the tube down in there. All this stuff is designed to hold itself fairly well together to make assembly a little bit easier. I check, make sure I got that centered. My warp core pattern. If you're using an unfrosted tube, of course, you wouldn't have to do that, but same drill again. I'm going to make sure I get my holes lined up. This is kind of hard to do with the camera in front of my face, but you'll kind of know when you've got it popped together. Alright. Add my screws in. Again, I'm just going to pre-tension these a little bit so that they're just where the cap is just starting to pull down onto the tension rods. Like I just felt it go with my finger there. Got my hand here, so when it starts to tighten down, I feel the cap move. Like right there, it just started to move. That one's a little sticky. The rod's actually spinning, so I'm not doing much good with it. Put this down so I don't scratch up the part. Alright, I'm taking the hex wrench, putting it on this end. Again, I'm just going to tighten it down until it starts to snug a little bit. I mentioned this in the last video if you didn't watch it. One way to help prevent a little tip here, do not put the wrench in like this, because you get so much leverage that it's easier to strip out screws. Put the wrench in like this, and then you have less leverage, and then let the pain in your finger sort of be an indicator. If it starts to hurt, you're just getting too tight, so don't go crazy. Just cinching that down a little bit, going to the opposite one. I'm just going to repeat. I'm just going a couple. See, that's still sticking out quite a bit, so I've got room to go there. You're basically just going to keep doing that tightening pattern all the way around. Okay, we've gone ahead and got most of those where they're supposed to be. We're going to do one quick pass to make sure that everybody's gotten a little attention. Again, let the pain in your finger sort of be the indicator. I'm not really tightening these, I'm just double checking more than anything. Sorry about the dust. I'm actually filming this in our shop, and there are about 50 machines in here that generate more dust than you can imagine. And of course, every speck of it leaped over here as soon as I turned the camera on. Again, when you see that the wrench flats are gone in there, just don't keep tightening. You're just asking for trouble as far as stripping screws goes. Next up, we'll add the mounts. I recommend that you go ahead and install these first before you put them in your case at least one time, just to get the screws accustomed to being, they're a little challenging to get in the first time. It's certainly easier when you're elbow deep in your case trying to hold the reservoir with one hand and put the screws in with the other if you've already put them in one time. Can be a little challenging because the mounts have a round to match the reservoir shape, so getting everything lined up can be a little tricky the first few times until you get used to it. I'm not putting these all the way in yet because I'm going to mount the lights too. And I'm short one matte black mount. Looks like today we'll be using a green mount in the middle. Technically wouldn't have to use the center mount if you weren't going to use the externally mounted CCFL lights. If you were using the lights that go inside in a tube, you wouldn't even have to have this mount in particular. But these are the, since we're using a UV reactive tube, I'm going to use the UV reactive lights. I guess I'll run cables off of each end just because we're making a video here. And then just go ahead and tighten these down. We'll fast forward through this part. And there you go, that's the mounts installed on the pump. One thing I forgot to cover is the little load spreader that's on the bottom of these would actually go on the back side of the panel that you're mounting the pump to. As I've covered in previous videos, the purpose of those is to first spread the load out so that you're not point loading all that weight from the reservoir on one small point. It also helps you if you've missed slightly with the mounting holes and you have to take the drill and hog the holes out a little bit. It covers up any little slight imperfections you've done with your measurements. That's basically how the couplers work. So that next question you ask is, what if you are using more than one coupler? Say in a situation like this, where you've got two couplers. Well, we'll show you how to do that real quick. It's basically the same principle, except you're going to take your tension rods and install the threaded screws on both ends, just like you did before. Make sure that the end that has the wrench cavity is sticking out. I'm just going to tighten those in. Take the little square wrench that comes with it. Use the hex key. In our case, we're just going to use our universal driver. I'm basically going to snug those down pretty good so that they're where they need to go. You're going to repeat that for all of your set screws. Take your coupler, make sure that your O-rings are in place and clean. Take your tube segment. In this case, we're not using the radioactive pattern, we're just using your basic green. Set that down. You can already see where this is going. You then take your next coupler, which I don't have. You have one here. Woohoo for me! Put that sandwich together. You can see that the set screws are sticking out. Then you would take your tension rods. I've got some black chrome ones here. Basically, we're going to start those down. Again, we're just putting them in until they're snugging up a little bit. Now the question is, how do you tighten these? When you tighten this one, it causes that one to spin. The question, or the answer, is the little wrenches that are provided. Basically, just put a wrench on either end. I'm just giving it a couple of turns and then going across to the opposite side. I'm not really cinching them down because I want to tighten the two parts together evenly. A little hard to do with the camera in my face. And you're basically just going to proceed around just like you would normally. Well, that one's not very tight. And then get the other three that you missed. And again, we're not trying to tighten these so tight that they can be launched into low Earth orbit. They only really have to work in a 5 psi environment. You get the idea as you tighten these down. A little hard to do with the camera in my face, like I said. After you've gone around and got all those, the rest of it builds pretty much the same way you would put your other tube on this end, whatever end cap you've selected, put your screws in, tighten everything down. That's basically how couplers work. Again, they allow you to make multiple tube segments join together. Basically, you could use as many of them as you wanted if your case was big enough, or if you were recently somebody posted a desktop PC where they built the PC underneath a piece of acrylic or glass on their desktop. And they have a really long reservoir in there. It looks like it's 2 or 3 feet long. Be a really good candidate for something like this. Things to look out for: don't over tighten screws. Make sure your O-rings are clean when you put them in. Again, pretty basic type assemblies. If you have any questions, you can contact me at the email address on the screen. I'd be happy to go over picking your parts for you. Just basically any way I can help at all. Use the email on the screen. That about covers it. Thanks for watching.